everyone. My name is Alexandra, and I'm going to be the session chair for the discussion session. We're going to maybe wait just 1 or 2 minutes if anyone else is going to join, and I'm going to start. All right, so we're going to start. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session on academic stress triggers, reflecting on results from a global survey on mental health among researchers. I will be the session chair for this session. Before we get started, I would like to thank the speakers and the audience for attendance and participation today. The conference couldn't be made without your support. So we're going to go over a few housekeeping items. So make sure you keep your microphone muted while the speakers are presenting. You're welcome to turn on your cameras if you want to see each other. We enabled closed captioning, so you may want to turn it on or off by clicking on the arrow next to the live script button. We will be recording and streaming the session, so right now the session is streamed and recorded. We're going to stop both of the streaming and recording in the last part of the session for Q&A. That will be 10 minutes in the end of the session. You will be notified by Zoom announcing that. We want to also provide a trigger warning, as some sensitive subjects may be discussed. If any of those topics are triggering or upsetting, we encourage you to step away and come back as needed, and want you to know that this is a supportive environment. That being said, we are not healthcare professionals and we do not provide counseling or therapy. You can visit our website at Minds in Academia Resources to refer to collected resources. Please remain respectful of each other. Any inappropriate behavior or comments will not be tolerated and may result in your removal from this conference. If you need help during the session, please contact IT in the Zoom meeting or email to mindsconference@gmail.com. You may enter your questions in the chat, and the chair will read them for the speakers. And you can also direct message the questions to the chair to remain anonymous. With that said, I'd like to welcome our speakers today. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrea Hayward and Mary McMillan, Dr. Mary McMillan. So I'm coming from educational background in psychology. Andrea Hayward has always been a passionate mental health advocate. As part of her current role at Cactus, she has been managing the CACTUS Mental Health Survey and related activities dealing with mental health and well-being in academia for close to 2 years. Andrea hopes that findings and insights from the survey and related initiatives will spark more open discussions around mental health in academia and trigger a much-needed change towards more positive academic culture. Dr. Mary McMillan is a senior lecturer in biomedical sciences at the University of New England, working with the Brain Behavior Research Group on investigating the use of biological and genetic markers in the diagnosis and treatment of depression. Mary is an alumna of the Homeward Bound Leadership Program for Women in STEM, was named as one of 12 STEM changemakers by Australian Academy of Sciences 2020, and is a current Science and Technology Australia Superstar of STEM. Thank you both for joining us today, and you're welcome to start your presentation.
Thank you, Alexandra. I'm sure I speak for both myself and Mary when I say that we're very thrilled to be here for what I believe is the first discussion group of the day. So we're very excited to be here, and thank you for having us. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Can you see my screen? Super. Presentation mode. Okay, So let's begin. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I don't want to get into too much about myself because I feel like Alexandra just covered all of that. So what we're going to be doing today, myself and Mary, is that we're going to be talking about results from a global survey on mental health among researchers. It's called the CACTUS Mental Health Survey. I will get into a little bit about what CACTUS is and what the survey is about shortly. I'll just let Mary maybe talk a little bit about the work that she does, and I will also cover who I am and what I do at CACTUS. Okay, so my name is Andrea, and I am part of the community engagement team at Cactus Communications. So a little bit about Cactus. We're a global technology firm, and we've been around for over 19 years. I've been with Cactus for the past 5 years. And like Alexandra said, for the past 2 years or so, I have been working on what is called the Cactus Mental Health Survey. It's a global survey on mental health and well-being among researchers. So I've been handling the survey, and I've been handling several related activities and initiatives. I also manage the official Twitter account of this initiative. I've put in the Twitter handle here, so please go ahead and give us a follow. And I am also one of the hosts of the Our Voice community, which is a global researcher community platform. Let's just move the slide. Mary?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction and for having us here today. I think that Alexandra has done a great job of giving you the kind of nuts and bolts of who I am and what I do. I've been working in the area of mental health research now for around about 7 or 8 years since I joined our brain behaviour research group at the University of New England. And that is really looking at how we can understand more about the biology of disorders like depression, also doing a little bit of work with autism spectrum disorders. But through the work that I've been doing and understanding more about mental health, and then also through my own experiences being an academic and working in academia for the last 9 years, I've really developed an interest in academic mental health and how we can really try and improve research and academic culture to make it a more accessible and diverse and happier place to work, really. So it's been really nice to be able to join with the team at Cactus to have some input into the mental health survey and to present a couple of times at a couple of different formats now about this kind of work that we do. So while Andrea's going to run you through some of the main survey results today, I've got a few ideas and suggestions around things that we can perhaps advocate for some change for within research, within academia, to help improve some of these kind of indicators of mental health that are popping up through the survey. So back to you, Andrea.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, so before I get into what the survey exactly covered, I want to move back to telling you a little bit more about Cactus. So like I said, we're a global technology company, and we started out as an organization that was devoted to helping researchers bridge the language barrier when it comes to academic publication. But over the years, we've grown to interact with and provide solutions for various other stakeholders in the academic community. So the reason that we even decided to do something like this is because our conversations with researchers over the years, and it has been quite a number of researchers from various countries across the globe, it led us to believe that while we were helping them in one aspect of their lives, which is publication, there was so much more that we could do, and there were so many other challenges that they were experiencing that no one was asking them about. No one was asking them how they felt about these stressors or how they felt about mental health. And so we felt that if we could provide them with that safe space or that platform where they could voice their concerns, they could voice their opinions without having to fear about the security of their jobs, without having to fear judgment and criticism, because a lot of the people who took the survey did do it anonymously. So it was safe in that way. So which is why we decided to do this. And I will put out a link. I have the link up on the screen here, but I will put out a link later as well. And I would encourage you to download both reports that we've put out. They're great reads and they're very insightful. And I'm not just saying that because I worked on them myself. but I would really encourage you to take a look at it. Like Mary mentioned, we collaborated with a lot of researchers who are passionate about this cause and who are very active in this space. And Mary was one of our collaborators. And coincidentally, we also worked with Wendy from Dragonfly Mental Health and the Dragonfly Mental Health team. So I feel like we're a really close community here and it's all coming together very well. Okay, so the CACTUS Mental Health Survey mainly dealt with mental health, fulfillment, and well-being in academia. It's called Joy and Stress Triggers, like you've seen on the previous slide, because we wanted to focus on the highs and lows of academic life as identified by the researcher community. So our questions were around which aspects of their work bring researchers joy, which ones cause them immense stress, and most importantly, what, in their opinion, can universities, institutions, and academic stakeholders and decision makers do to provide more support to help them cope better. So we ran the survey in 7 languages for 9 months. And as you can see from some of the stats here on the screen, we received an overwhelming response. 13,000 researchers participated globally in the survey, and it covered a whole lot of countries, a whole lot of academic career stages. And we even received great representation from several minority groups. So it gave us a great understanding into what researchers believe are some of the issues that exist in the current academic culture, and to receive suggestions from them in terms of what institutions can do has really been very telling. So both Mary and I believe that the responsibility of dealing with stress, of coping, of anchoring mental health, or just of dealing with stressors is often put too much on researchers, on graduate students, and on faculty, without really acknowledging that there are several systemic issues and several systemic stressors and challenges that they have to deal with on a daily basis. So what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on these existing issues and these academic stress triggers that have been identified by the mental health survey results. And like Mary said, I will take you through what we actually found. And then Mary is going to come through with some great suggestions and ideas on what can be done by institutions and organizations to improve this for the better. We also want this to be as interactive as possible. So there's a lot of polls coming your way. There are a lot of questions coming your way. And we want to hear from you as well. Okay, so if you just look at this screen, these are the main concern areas that we will be focusing on. It's not limited to this, but we do have just 1 hour, and I've tried to cover as much as possible what we found. Okay, so the survey is joy and stress triggers. So before we jump into what the stressors were, I just wanted to focus on the good news. And the researchers who participated in the survey did have some positive things to say about their work and their work environments. So as you can see, 76% of the sample size agreed that their work gave them a sense of purpose and fulfillment. About half indicated that their academic work environment inspires them to work towards their research goals. And almost 2/3 indicated that they look forward to their work day and they enjoy the intellectual and creative challenges involved. The reason I wanted to highlight this is because this just goes to say, it just speaks to the passion and the dedication with which the academic community works, despite all odds and despite all of the stresses that they have to go through. But the point of this presentation is that they shouldn't have to. The whole concept and the whole reality of surviving academia shouldn't exist at all. And just imagine how much more the community could do if they didn't have to deal with all of these stressors on a day-to-day. Okay, so the main indicator of mental health that we used in the survey was a question around how often participants felt overwhelmed by their work situation. And so we're starting with a poll to ask you this very same question. You should see it up on your screen right now. Okay, I see the results coming in. Okay. Give it a couple more minutes. All right, thank you so much for taking the poll. I think we can end the poll. I've seen the results. Yeah. Just trying to go to the next screen. So the results are very much similar to what we found in the survey. And as you can see on the screen, over 1/3 of the survey participants indicated that they felt overwhelmed by their work situation fairly or very often. And I saw that it was almost 40%. I'm not looking at the poll right now, so correct me if I'm wrong. It was almost 40% for very often, which is very alarming. And in terms of working hours, we looked at working hours and we found that 31% reported working more than 50 hours a week. And there was a 13% that reported working more than 60 hours per week. That's a whole lot of working hours. We also found that participants who worked longer hours were more likely to report feeling overwhelmed frequently. We dug deeper to see if there were any variations based on countries, and it was very alarming to find that there were several countries in which this percentage was way above the global average of 38%, including Australia, as you can see here. I've just highlighted that because of the present company that we're in, no other reason. But as you can see, these numbers are very alarming in terms of researchers just feeling overwhelmed by their work situation. Moving on to work-related pressures, almost 2/3 of the survey participants indicated that they were under tremendous pressure to publish papers, secure grants, and complete projects. And as you can see, more than half agreed that they were unsure about their job prospects and their chances of having a stable career. So we come back to the issue of job security and job stability here. And almost half agreed that they felt their research performance was being unfairly evaluated in their organization. And around the same, I think almost about the same percentage of people felt that they had too many non-research responsibilities at work. I am going to hand over to Mary.
So it's a little bit of a alarming picture that we paint with at least those first few bits of data that we collected through the survey. Some of those major pressures that people were feeling was that they had a lack of job security, that there was intense pressure to publish to try and be competitive for different grants and fellowships and other opportunities. And just feeling overwhelmed in general about the amount of work that's being asked from academics. And to hear that so many of the survey participants are working 60+ hours, that to me is a huge red flag. So this is kind of indicative that we've got this real problem within the culture of academia in general. I think all of these things, this idea of publish or perish, this idea of competing against each other for very small pools of funding for very rare jobs, is putting extreme pressure on researchers. What I've put up here on this slide is a few things that I think we can do. And this is not by far an exhaustive list of all the things that we could change about academia to improve some of those or remove or reduce some of those stresses. But it's a few things that I think are realistic or more realistic for us to start to try and advocate for as far as changes within our own organisations and within the academic culture in general. And I think one of the things at the top of the list is a real need to reassess how we determine merit. And that means looking beyond just publication lists so that we can kind of start to quash this idea of it's all about publish or perish, and to take a more holistic approach to how we measure what merit is and how we assess merit when we're looking at grants and promotions and all of these sort of things. I think there's a lot more to an academic role than just publishing. And I think we should be starting to look beyond that and looking at things like the impact that people have, whether that is maybe community impact or impact in teaching, impact in mentorship, demonstrations of leadership. How we actually go about doing that, I think, is a huge challenge to go beyond just publication lists. But I think it's something that our organisations and our academic culture is starting to consider. And I think it would be really interesting to hear people's ideas, if they'd love to put them in the chat, about how we might go about looking at some of those things. We also need to make sure that we're assessing things like grants, fellowships and promotion applications relative to opportunity. And I think this is something that in the past has very much disadvantaged particular groups of people. And women in STEM there's been a huge push for greater equity in STEM in recent years, but that focus has been mostly on women in STEM, although we know that there are much more greater issues with diversity in STEM than just looking at gender equity. But looking at things relative to opportunity, rather than just looking at how many, those lists of publications and things, but looking at what people have managed to achieve in their academic and research careers relative to the opportunities that they've had. So whether that might be research while carrying a large teaching load, or research while on short-term contracts, or research while taking caring responsibilities. So I think together, those two things, looking at how we determine merit and how we actually assess things relative to people's opportunity, could do a lot to relieve some of the pressure that researchers and academics are feeling at the moment. A huge thing that would make a big difference in a lot of people's lives would be a move away from these very much casual and externally funded positions into more stable positions for academics and researchers. Something that I've seen done well at my own organisation in recent years has been some dedicated early career researcher or early career academic pathways where people have been given longer term contracts, and then those have been converted into continuing appointments at the end of that contract period, which has allowed people to have a little more stability for that period and start to really build their research record, the publication record, and all of those things, which has made them more competitive then in applying for grants and fellowships and things. Right now, we rely far too heavily on a casual workforce and far too many very short-term contracts, and that insecurity is placing a huge amount of pressure, particularly on young academics who are often working, maybe moving from postdoc to postdoc position. So I think we need to continue to really advocate and push for our organisations to move away from those kind of positions and actually properly fund those positions internally to maintain those researchers in those organisations. One of the other things that comes up again and again as being a huge stressor in academic work is actually writing applications for grants and fellowships and things, and the time that this actually takes. If you ask probably any researcher how much time they spend on this, think about those non-direct research hours that you've got. A lot of those are being spent in preparing very, very long applications, which have very, very low success rates. I was able to participate in a roundtable recently with a funding body here in Australia, and one of the things that was discussed at great length was the idea that we could potentially change some of these application processes for grants and fellowships and turn them into a process which might be something like an expression of interest that is a much shorter application to put in at the start, and then those are culled down, and then only a full application is put in from shortlisted applicants, which would put a lot less pressure on people. If you think about the large funding bodies, particularly here in Australia, writing ARC or NHMRC applications, those are not just a couple of hours of time. These are, half of people's year is spent really working on these applications. That is a lot of time that's going into something with such small success rates. So another thing that we're trying to push with some of those funding bodies is to move into changing not just how they assess things like those relative opportunities and merit, but also how they actually take those applications and how they have those application processes working. So as I said, not an exhaustive list of things that we can do here, but a few ideas that I'd love to hear people's thoughts on as far as how we might move forward with advocating. But I'm going to pass back to Andrea to present the next bit of data.
Thanks, Mary. Okay. So the next bit of data is around work-life balance, and if we could just have the poll up on screen, please. You should see it by now. Okay, so it's majority has said no. The few people who said yes, I'd love to circle back to you later and just to understand what kind of support that your organization or institution is providing. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so the reason I wanted to talk about this is because we see so many conversations all around where universities and institutions are telling their graduate students or their researchers to focus on work-life balance and focus on self-care. But how would they if there are no support channels and there are no facilities, no policies which would actually help them achieve this? And that is something we wanted to check when we ran the survey as well. We found that 43% of survey participants didn't have sufficient time to spend on hobbies, recreation, social activities, or something as simple as spending time with their family. And almost 40% disagreed that they slept enough every night, and they weren't satisfied with their financial situation. Another thing that's very important to speak about here, I think, is that 43%, that's a very large number, indicated that their organization didn't have effective policies or facilities around work-life balance. And if we're thinking about the numbers of the 13,000 researchers, just 8%, the one you see here, they strongly agreed that their organization did have effective policy. So if you think about what about everyone else is the first question that pops up into my mind. What are they doing? How are they coping? Pass on to Mary.
So I think a lot of what we see here in terms of work-life balance comes back to the stresses that we talked about in the previous session. You know, that idea that we need to publish and we need to spend so many hours writing these long grant applications. So all of those things that we spoke about before would certainly do a lot to potentially help improve some work-life balance for people. However, I think there are some things that our organisations can actually do to encourage this. And I think it's really important that organisations, and again, these are things that we can advocate for within our own sector and our own organisations, but having actual transparent workload policies so that people can see what is actually expected and it's agreed upon at the start, up front, as to what you're going to be doing in a particular period. I think that doesn't happen enough. My own organisation, we're just going through a workload renewal policy at the moment. So at the moment, we don't really actually have a workload as such that we have agreed to. And we're all just doing everything that we can and doing so much on top of our teaching and research expectations. So personally, I can't wait until we actually get that new workload model coming in so that we can see and talk more with our supervisors and line managers about how realistic and manageable those particular workloads are. And I think those workloads and things need to be absolutely reviewed quite regularly, as things just do creep in. How many times do you get that email that says, oh, can you just do this? Can you just do that? Can you now join this committee or do this extra thing? There's all of these expectations that are being added on to the sort of our work. So if we just look at things like, this is the research work that I have to do, or this is the teaching work that I have to do, there's all of these other things that exist outside of that we need to make sure are captured in workloads and reviewed, and that things like performance planning and reviews are actual exercises that help with workload management rather than just being tick box exercises that they often become at the moment. I think we also need to advocate for more flexible and remote working options. Obviously, in current circumstances, remote working has become the norm and we're all getting used to that. And for a lot of people, that has actually allowed them to be more productive. Not for everyone, and certainly not for those probably who are at home, as I have been throughout part of this pandemic with children and things at home. But in general, when people can have more flexible working conditions and the opportunity to manage their own time and space more, they can be more productive. So we need to encourage that we don't have to go back to our old model of working when, I guess, this is all over. On a more personal level, something that I have found really useful in my own academic life is coaching and mentoring that can help support people. These things can help people to be more strategic and more deliberate in the decision making around what they are saying yes to and the things that they are taking on in order to actually go ahead and achieve their own purpose and goals. So I think it can be really invaluable to have that sort of external voice helping to guide people. I would love to actually see more organisations help support those kind of programs. Again, it is adding workload though to people that are already there, but supporting people to have some sort of coaching and mentoring would, I think, help assist with managing and maintaining a little bit more work-life balance. And I think most importantly, what we need our supervisors and leaders to do is to actually lead by example. And I know that one of the things that's coming through in the chat that I can see even as I'm talking is that overwork is something that has been glorified quite a bit. There's a very incredibly strong culture of overwork, and I see it myself walking down the corridors in my own building, and people will say, oh yes, I was up to 3 a.m. doing X, Y, and Z. And it's almost like this badge of honor to be working ridiculous hours and be exhausted and be starting to burn out. And I think what we really need to do is have people leading by example. If you are somebody who has the opportunity to supervise students or other academic colleagues, I think it's incredibly important to lead by example and show people that it is absolutely okay to take time off, that it is okay to take leave, normalise standard work hours or a certain amount of work hours and not overworking. And I think we are starting to see these conversations happen more and more on things like social media, where people are starting to call those out, where people are making comments about you're not dedicated or you're weak if you're not working this incredible amount of hours. I think that we're starting to change the narrative around that a little bit, but I think it does take people to take that lead and to call out those kind of comments when they see them, to show people that working in academia can be just like any other job. You can have a manageable workload, work your certain hours and still have time to enjoy your life and your hobbies and families. So changing that conversation is really important. And if there's one thing that I guess people could take out of this, is that I hope that we can all start to be those people who do lead by example. I certainly try and make that happen for my own students and model to them that, yes, we only are working a standard working week. We're not working ridiculous hours. And no, we're not going to glorify that type of overwork. Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks, Mary. I love the last bit about leading by example. That really spoke to me. I wanted to add something that I recall from one of the anonymous comments in the survey, wherein someone said that his institution did have policies around work-life balance, but he said they didn't mean them. So he actually put in caps, mean what you say. Sorry, he or she, I don't remember, or they, mean what you say, in that if you're actually putting up these policies, if you're encouraging people to take breaks, if you're encouraging people to engage in self-care activities, but then you're not making space for any of these policies or any of these facilities that you claim to be providing, then that's a problem. And in fact, you're not helping, you're actually making the problem worse, because it seems like they can take breaks, they can apply for leaves, but if that's not the case because of the incredible workload that they have to deal with, then that's not helping at all. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about whether or not the survey participants felt safe, included, and valued in academia. So you should see a poll up right now. I'm so happy to see the poll results. I don't think I've ever seen such a resounding agreement to this. One time, I'm very happy that it does not match our survey responses. Okay, thank you for taking that poll. Okay, so one of the questions in the survey, we asked people whether or not they felt welcomed and included in their organization and by their peers and supervisors, irrespective of factors like gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or social background. And 16% of the respondents disagreed or strongly disagreed with the statement. This might seem like something that's very small and something that you shouldn't talk about because it's just 16%. But I make it a point to always talk about this one specifically, because you're thinking of scale and you're thinking 16% of 13,000 people. And even if it was just 10%, why should they have to feel like this is my question always. It makes you wonder what exactly is happening that's making them feel like this, how often it's happening, what they have to go through on a daily basis. And it also makes you wonder whether there's anyone out there that knows, whether anyone knows they're feeling like this, whether they have the space to talk about it, whether anyone would even listen if they brought it up. So I feel like this is a really important finding, and I always make it a point to highlight this one. Okay, this one is very alarming and it's very disturbing as well. So as you can see on the screen, over 1/3 of the survey participants reported that they either were experiencing or had experienced some form of discrimination, harassment, or bullying at work. And we also asked a question on whether or not they felt that their institution had strict policies to detect, prevent, or do something about such behaviors at work. And we found that 66% of those who agreed that their institution lacked such policies, they had reported experiencing such behaviors in the workplace. So a comment that I recall, which was around this area of bullying and harassment in the survey, was just take people seriously. Take people seriously, take everything that they're saying seriously, because what you might think is just a joke or is playful or just you being funny, it might be affecting someone in a really terrible way, and you might not even realize what you're doing. So a lot of the comments that came through around this area was that you need to have important policies in place where people can feel like they can at least bring up such experiences without feeling like they'll be made fun of or people won't take them seriously. And I think Mary will cover some of those in her suggestions.
I think this should absolutely go without saying that every workplace should have very, very clear policies around discrimination, bullying, harassment, and procedures that allow people to report these incidents, particularly anonymously. And I think at the moment, this, perhaps our current audience and the difference we saw in those survey results was because of where we are, time zone that we're in at the moment. Because I know when I've talked to audiences about this before, I think some countries have this more commonly throughout their organisations than others. But I think we absolutely have to have those clear bullying and harassment and policies and procedures in place, and they need to be followed. I think we need to make sure that we have these policies and procedures that actually see something being done. I think that's the problem at the moment, and I think that's something that's come through in the chat already, is that yes, people see that there are policies and these things exist, but are they actually used in practice, and is there actually any punishment or penalties or any consequences of these things currently? And I think that's a big question mark. Although we may have very clear policies in place, do we actually see anything happening as a result of those? I question that at the moment. Another thing that I think is important to talk about is, so many people have experienced some kind of discrimination or harassment in the workplace. And even if they haven't, when we have problems with diversity in our academic workforce, that can lead to people feeling that they don't belong, that they are excluded, that they, are not a part of that culture, whether or not they've actually been harassed or discriminated against or not. We have this problem that we see, for want of a better word, a very whitewashed workforce that we work in. And I say that sitting here as a white woman, telling people about diversity, which is probably a problem to start with. What can we do about this? Earlier I mentioned that as far as diversity and inclusion and things goes, this discussion has started happening more around gender equity and looking at women in STEM, for example. Now in Australia, our organisations are being encouraged to join things like the Athena Swan program, which makes them do audits of things like gender diversity and actually report on that and what their workforce looks like. There are professionals out there that can help organisations with this, doing diversity and culture audits and actually identify areas within organisations or even within smaller teams where there are issues and where improvements can be made. So I think having those external professionals come in would be extremely useful for a lot of organisations, rather than trying to do this internally, and having that external eye auditing and looking at what's happening within organisations could really help to identify those areas where an organisation can do a lot better in terms of diversity and culture. And then have those reports, again, being a little bit more transparent, so people can actually see maybe even a ranking somewhere of different organisations and what it's like to work for them. I think we need to make sure that people are trained and supported. One of the things that, working as a scientist, I find is really interesting that we get a heck of a lot of training in how to be a scientist and how to design experiments and write papers and all of these things. But what people aren't often given training in is how to actually work with other people and leadership and how to be a good mentor. And I think it's really important that we actually do provide training and support for people in those kind of areas. And I would love to see within organisations things like on unconscious bias training, anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, disability awareness training being actually made mandatory for anyone who's working at these kind of organisations. I think these are things people should have to do and be made aware of before they are allowed to lead or mentor or support or supervise others in the workplace. And I think it's really important that one thing that comes up time and time again as we talk about anything to do with diversity and discrimination is that generally the people that are being asked to do the work around this are those who have experienced these issues themselves personally. And I think it's extremely important that we don't just leave it to those people to advocate for change in workplaces. That must be absolutely exhausting, being continuously asked to come and show up and do that work. We already know that these things are issues. We need to stop asking those people and all of us start to ask our organisations for change. We know that there's problems. We know that things need to change. So let's not just leave it to those who have experienced this before. Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, so we're going to move on to how comfortable researchers feel seeking help, if at all they feel like they need help. So there should be a poll up on screen right now. Okay, so we have a majority people saying no, they wouldn't be comfortable disclosing a mental health concern to their supervisor. Just give it a couple more seconds. Okay, thank you for taking that poll, everyone. I would say that the survey results are fairly similar to what we've seen in the poll, because we had half of the survey participants saying that they would not discuss work-based feelings of severe stress or anxiety with relevant people or authorities in their workplace. And we had almost 2/3 of people who were experiencing stress or anxiety because of their work situation, saying that they had not sought professional help. I think more than the numbers here, however large or small the numbers would have been here, it's really important just to focus on the key barriers to accessing workplace support as spoken about by the survey respondents. And some of these were very alarming. There were people saying that they would not even bring it up because they were afraid of how it would make them look. They were afraid of not being taken seriously. And I feel that just speaks to the amount of stigma we have associated with any conversation at all about mental health or mental illness in academia. There was also people who felt that others wouldn't be able to help, and not to assign blame here, but I feel like if there was some sort of infrastructure in place which made them feel safe and made them feel like they can actually open up there, then we wouldn't be having this problem. The last one and the most concerning of all is that a lot of people didn't feel like they needed to speak up because they felt like such feelings of severe stress or anxiety or any other problem like this was just a normal part of academic life. And so it just went with the territory. And so they didn't have to report it because it wasn't a challenge. It was something that they had to just pull up their socks and deal with. Okay.
Yeah, I think working as someone who's working in mental health research, we know that the stigma around mental health is huge. I think we're getting a little bit better about talking about it in general in our society these days, but we need to improve or change the way we talk about it within the realm of academia, because there is still this huge amount of stigma. People don't want to disclose these things because they think it will impact their chances. And some of that comes back to things like the job insecurity and other issues that we talked about earlier. That again, our culture has been created in such a way that people are very fearful of disclosing these things because of all of those other aspects of our culture. Again, within organizations, things that organizations can do, we really need people to be able to access independent and confidential health services within organizations. Some organizations are starting to do this well and actually providing access to like a third party provider to provide that confidential support for staff, so that it's not, you're not needing to talk to somebody within your own organization, which could then, should they, record that somewhere, things could spread, or people could feel like that could spread through the organization. So having that external provider providing the mental health services, I think is a really good move. Generally, though, all mental health services are completely underfunded in across all countries, including here in Australia. Would also like to see more training for staff in terms of mental health awareness and mental health first aid, to be able to assist and have these conversations with their students and people that they're supervising. We also need to work towards creating a culture where these issues can be openly and honestly discussed. Again, coming back to leading by example. I was having a discussion with a senior academic recently around mental health in academia, and he said, all of these years that I've been supervising students and no one's ever really, indicated that there were any issues. I didn't realise it was such a big problem. And I thought, why is that you haven't realised that is that a big problem? Is that because you haven't created a culture and a team where people feel that they can actually come and address these issues with you? And I know that within my own group, I try and be extremely open. And I think a great example, and I'm sharing this with permission of this trainee that I had a couple of years ago, and she did experience mental health issues, and we created a relationship whereby instead of trying to hide that and, try and say that she was sick or something else was going on, she was able to be very open and honest with me about, needing to take some time. And I was able to work with her. She was absolutely able to achieve all of the things that any other trainee ever has been able to. But we were able to have those open and honest discussions. And I think that's because we were able to create this culture within our team where we can talk about these things. And I think that providing more training for supervisors would go a long way to assist with them being able to create sort of those group norms and things. And having those conversations outside of our own organisations as well. I recently presented at an annual meeting for a particular society, and they were incorporating a session on mental health within their annual scientific meeting. We have our EMCR forum meeting coming up in a couple of months, and one of the sessions as part of that is about mental health. So starting to have different organisations and societies incorporating these sessions, again, starts to create that culture. And again, just like with issues around diversity and things, we can't just leave it to those who've experienced those issues to advocate for change. Because again, let's stop asking people to relive those traumas, and let's all start advocating for these changes within our organisations as well.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing the screen right now. So we've finished the presentation bit of our session today. And I know that a lot of you have been typing in the chat, and thank you so much for taking the polls as well. But we would like to, if you'd let us, we'd like to hear a little bit more from you. And so I'm just going to paste a link in the chat right now, which I'd like you to open up so that we can hear a little bit more from you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea and Mary, for an incredible talk and a lot of insights into the academic stress triggers, but also some brainstorming around different strategies that institutions and we as individuals can address and try to put forward our efforts and maybe slowly improve and make academia a more inclusive and welcoming space for everyone. This was an incredible session, and I'll let you maybe say some final words before we conclude our AWST session block.
Sure. Mary, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for coming along and showing up to these discussions, because I think that is such an important step, is actually just having these discussions. But obviously, it's a little bit like preaching to the choir sometimes when we come and present these sessions. People who are already aware of the issues and engaged with the discussions are the people who show up. And what I think we really need to try and do now is reach those who aren't here, reach the people who aren't here and showing up for these kind of discussions, and somehow make them see the importance of mental health and wellbeing within the academic setting. So I hope that I can continue to connect with some of you after this and keep working on that as we go. But thank you very much for joining us.
I would like to mirror what Mary said. Thank you everyone for being here and for being such a great audience, and for engaging with us as you did. It's been fantastic. And thank you to Alexandra and to the entire Minds Conference team. I feel like this initiative is fantastic. I don't think that a year ago we'd even think of a single conference with maybe 4 sessions, but to have a 24-hour conference dedicated to speaking about mental health in academia, I think that's brilliant. And I feel like this is really paving the way for a lot more. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who chaired this session and who contributed to all the different discussions. And gonna conclude. So this concludes our Australian Western Standard Time section of the Minds Conference 2021. Thank you to all the speakers for generating thoughtful discussions today on a variety of topics, for training to mental health in academic settings, and thanks for Dragonfly Mental Health for hosting the workshop that kicked off this session, and for their support and bringing this conference together. Thank you all the attendees for your support and participation. We hope that all you have learned something new today, or at least connected with new people, and maybe this will help us to continue the conversation in the future, and we can adopt some tips and ideas, improving things moving forward. This session today was partially recorded and will be subject for approval to our speakers, and we will make it available on our website, and we will notify when it will be available. So hopefully you will be able to access sessions from the different time zones that you won't be able to attend in person. Finally,